Today we are going to be taking a look at the Surge from Focused Interactive and Deck 13. These are the makers of Lords of the Fallen. If you remember, that was a game that came out a few years back. It was very similar to Dark Souls, and this is also rather Dark Souls-esque, although it's in a different setting, this one being more of a sci-fi versus the fantasy setting that we saw in Lords of the Fallen and also in the Dark Souls, Demon Souls series. So if you are a fan of that type of hardcore combat that's, rather punishing, then this game would probably be right up your alley. And personally, I usually struggle to enjoy the Dark Souls game, at least with the PC ports. This, I think so far, is actually a very good PC port. The controls on mouse and keyboard feel very fluid. I've been enjoying the game thus far, and it's ran very well on the 1060 and the RX 480, as well as my 1080 Ti systems. So it's, just looking really good so far. So we're going to go over the performance as it is running in this game. This game is on the Fledge engine, the same exact engine as Lords of the Fallen, although that game had a lot of performance issues, honestly, and combat issues. It was just not a very good game overall. This, I think, is a very big improvement from what Deck 13 and Focus Interactive did with Lords of the Fallen. So we're going to go through the testing here. On all of the testing, I was using the latest drivers from NVIDIA and AMD. So for NVIDIA, that's 382.19, and on AMD, it's 17.5.1. And while for my GTX 1080 Ti testing, I was using my i7 6800K system, the RX 480 versus the GTX 1060 was all done on the Ryzen 1400 system, along with 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance RAM, clocked at 2933 megahertz. And I keep that Ryzen 1400 at 3.7 gigahertz. The GTX 1060 as well as the 1080 Ti both have overclocks of 200 megahertz on the core and 300 megahertz on the memory, while the RX 480 comes in with 1400 megahertz on its core and 2150 megahertz on the memory. So that's all the pertinent specs you guys need to know. So let's jump into the graphics options before we tell you all of the final numbers on what these systems were able to hit in terms of average and minimum FPS. So in the video options here, we do have a decent amount of customization right now. Playing at 1440p, we did have 144 Hz support in here, so no issues with any of that. Really no issues really as far as the options menu is concerned. We don't have a ton of advanced options in here, but the ones that we do have available to us, I did have at the highest available settings in the game. So we've got a resolution scale slider, which I just kept at 100%. We've also got texture quality, shadow quality, volumetric lighting, which on the very high preset actually puts that to high, but I opted to bump it up to very high because that's, well, the furthest that I could push it to the right, so that's why we did it. And for motion blur quality, I've also got that on very high for our testing, although I would probably opt to leave that to off, in the future, but it didn't really impact the performance all that much, but I just chose to leave everything on at the highest it would go. For anti-aliasing, we've got off, we've got FXAA, and we've got SMA. I did use SMA in all of my testing, which is my favorite form of anti-aliasing, so I'm glad they used that here. And we've also got toggles for screen space, reflections, ambient occlusion, subsurface scattering, and a lens flare intensity slider, which goes from 0 all the way up to 100%. I had just left that at 100% during my testing, and I chose to turn off chroma shift, which sounds more like chromatic aberration from the descriptor on here, which describes it as an effect simulating the failure of a lens to focus all colors to the same convergence point. So yeah, that's basically chromatic aberration, which I don't like in games, so I left that off. But let's go ahead and get into the performance numbers now. We will start off with the RX 480 up against the GTX 1060 here, and we will go to 1080p, where we saw the RX 480 get an average of 76 FPS and a minimum of 67, while the GTX 1060 got an average of 73 and a minimum of 62. So both cards are very capable, certainly, of powering this game at 1080p, so it seems to be pretty well optimized for the kind of mid-range GPUs around that $250 price point. Conceivably, you could assume the RX 580 would even run it a little bit better. So as far as 480 and 580 versus 1060 goes, it looks like AMD is running this game better, certainly at 1080p in the averages and the minimums. And that is continued over in 1440p, where the RX 40 got an average of 52 and a minimum of 45, while the GTX 1060 managed to pull in an average of 47 and a minimum of 39. So both cards struggling at 1440p to maintain, an average of 60, but I would say both cards were able to run it smooth enough where I could play it. I would certainly look to lower some options down, though. I would probably maybe look to lower anti-aliasing, bring everything down to high, and see where you can go from there. I dropped it down to the high preset, and I got a boost of about 5 to 6 FPS. So you may need to toggle a few more options than that if you're looking to play this game at 1440p on either the RX 480 or the GTX 1060. So it gets fairly GPU bound, so you will have to toggle some options there if you want to play at a higher resolution. But it was still very smooth. I didn't see any big lag spikes or anything like that. It was just, you know, very resource intensive on the graphics card. 1080 Ti, that ran the game like an absolute dream, especially at 1440p on a 144Hz screen. That managed to get an average of 95 FPS and a minimum of 75 at that 1440p resolution, which is what I choose to play it at, so the game is just running great for me. I've enjoyed it on both systems that I played it on, though. The Ryzen 1400 didn't limit me in any way, and the game seemed to be utilizing all of the threads also on the Ryzen 1400. And continuing on with the 1080, though, at 4K, that managed to only get an average of 49 FPS and a minimum of 38, so it is struggling at 4K, even on the 1080 Ti, so you'll probably want to lower some options in there. Maybe mess around with the resolution scale slider, although that's technically playing at a lower resolution. If you want to, you know, leave it at native 4K and get a smoother experience, then you might want to just toggle some options there, even on the 1080 Ti. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with how this game is running. Like I said, I'm enjoying the gameplay as well. It's very much like a Dark Souls, but in a sci-fi setting with mechs and things, which is right up my alley as far as the things I enjoy in games. So I'm going to go back to playing this probably. If you do want to pick it up, I'll leave a link over to CD Keys down in the description below. I believe it's $42 on there right now, which is not a whole lot cheaper than what you can get it for on Steam. On Steam, it's only $50. Obviously, if you get it on Steam, you have the advantage of, you know, getting a full refund in case you don't like the game for whatever reason. It doesn't run well on your system. You have that option with Steam, so I would definitely push people to go towards Steam. But if you definitely want to get this game and you know you're going to like it, then you can go the CD Keys route and help support the channel and save yourself maybe about $8 or $9, but probably not worth it in the grand scale of things if you want to have the option to get a refund later on. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Please leave your thoughts down below on the Surge, and a like on this video if you enjoyed this type of performance review like we always do here on the channel, and I'll catch you guys next time. Tara.